Sometimes the greatest act of love is opening your hand instead of closing your fist. I never believed goodbye could sound so quiet until the morning Nathan Walker drove me to the train station without a single bodyguard following behind us. The city was just beginning to wake. Coffee shops unlocked their doors, streetlights faded beneath a pale autumn sky, and the first commuter train waited with its doors open as if it had all the time in the world. Nathan parked a few spaces away from the entrance and turned off the engine. For a long moment neither of us moved. The silence between us carried more weight than every conversation we had shared during the past year. I studied his reflection in the windshield. The man everyone feared looked strangely exhausted. His charcoal overcoat rested perfectly across his shoulders, yet the confidence he always carried seemed hidden somewhere behind his calm blue eyes. He reached into the back seat and lifted my small suitcase before opening my door as though this were any ordinary trip. It was not. We both knew that once the train pulled away, our lives would separate in completely different directions. He walked beside me across the platform, never rushing, never trying to convince me to stay, never asking me to change my mind. That was what made leaving hurt even more. Nathan had always respected my choices, even when those choices broke his own heart. The train conductor announced boarding, and a cold breeze swept across the station carrying the scent of rain. Nathan reached into his coat pocket and placed a simple silver key into my hand. "There is a small lake house 3 states away," he said quietly. "Everything inside belongs to you now. No one knows about it except me." I looked at the key without understanding. "Why are you doing this?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. He smiled gently, but the sadness in his eyes remained. "Because if you stay here, people will keep looking at you instead of me. I cannot allow that." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him we could face whatever came together. Instead, I remembered every evening he had quietly protected strangers, every promise he had kept without asking for recognition, every time he had chosen patience over anger. Nathan had never built walls around me. He had only opened doors. The loudspeaker announced the final boarding call. I stepped onto the first train step before turning back toward him. "Will I ever see you again?" He looked toward the distant skyline before answering. "I hope not." The words struck harder than I expected, yet his expression told a completely different story. He hoped I would never need him again because that would mean I was finally safe. Tears blurred my vision as the train doors slowly closed. Through the window I watched him remain exactly where I had left him, hands resting inside his coat pockets, standing completely alone while the platform gradually disappeared behind us. I pressed my hand against the cold glass until his figure became nothing more than a shadow beneath the morning light. I thought our story had ended that day. I spent the next 3 years convincing myself that walking away had saved both of us. Then, on a rainy October afternoon, I stood once again at the edge of the same city carrying an old wooden box that had never belonged to me, a sealed letter that had never been opened, and a secret capable of changing everything Nathan believed about his own family. Rain welcomed me back to the city exactly the way it had watched me leave 3 years earlier. I stood outside the old train station with the worn wooden box pressed tightly against my chest, while the unopened letter rested safely inside my coat pocket. Nothing about the city had truly changed. The same brick buildings lined the streets. The same church bells echoed through the afternoon. Even the cool October wind carried the familiar scent of coffee drifting from the corner cafe where Nathan and I had once shared a quiet morning before either of us admitted our feelings. Only I had changed. 3 years of silence had taught me that distance could protect a person from danger, but it could never erase memory. I could still picture Nathan standing alone on the platform as my train disappeared beyond the horizon. I had promised myself I would never return. Yet promises made without knowing the truth rarely survived it. I rented a small room several blocks away instead of driving directly to Nathan's estate. Before facing him, I needed answers myself. I carefully placed the wooden box on the small table beneath the window and slowly brushed away the dust that had gathered across its surface during years of careful hiding. The brass lock remained untouched. My fingers hesitated before fitting the old silver key into place. With a quiet click, the lid finally opened. Inside rested neatly bundled letters tied together with faded navy ribbon, several black and white photographs, and a leather journal worn smooth by countless hands. Every item belonged to Nathan's late father. At the very bottom lay a sealed envelope bearing only one handwritten sentence. To be opened only when Claire returns. My heartbeat slowed. My name had been written years before I had ever met Nathan. Carefully breaking the wax seal, I unfolded the letter. The elegant handwriting belonged to a man I had never met, yet every word felt strangely personal. He wrote about mistakes that could never be corrected, promises that deserved to survive him, and one final responsibility entrusted to someone he believed would choose compassion over fear. He explained that powerful people often left behind wealth, but true character could only be inherited through decisions. Near the end of the letter, one sentence refused to leave my mind. My son will believe he is protecting you by letting you go. One day you must protect him by coming back. Tears blurred the page as I finished reading. Suddenly the years of silence carried an entirely different meaning. Nathan had never known this letter existed. He believed sending me away had ended the story, while his own father had quietly prepared for the day I would return. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. When I opened the apartment door, an elderly woman stood there holding a folded newspaper. She smiled kindly before speaking my name, as though she had expected me. Mr. Walker's father asked me to watch for you if you ever came back, she said softly. There is someone else looking for that box now. Before I could ask another question, she handed me the newspaper and slowly walked away. Across the front page appeared the photograph of a respected businessman recently appointed chairman of a charitable foundation. Everyone admired him. Nathan trusted him completely. Yet hidden inside the article was one familiar face from an old photograph inside the wooden box, standing just behind Nathan's father many years ago. At that moment I realized the secret I carried was never the true danger. The dangerous part was that someone powerful would do almost anything to make certain Nathan never discovered it. The newspaper remained open on the small apartment table long after the rain stopped outside my window. I studied the smiling face of Richard Holloway over and over again. Every article described him as a respected businessman, generous philanthropist, and trusted advisor to some of the city's most influential families. The photographs showed him standing beside charity directors, community leaders, and children receiving scholarships. To everyone else, he looked like the kind of man people admired without hesitation. Yet inside the old wooden box rested another photograph taken nearly 30 years earlier. Nathan's father stood in the center with several colleagues beside him, and just behind his shoulder stood a much younger Richard Holloway wearing the exact same calm smile. On the back of the photograph someone had written a single sentence in faded blue ink. Trust must always be earned, never inherited. I could not stop wondering whether Nathan had ever seen that picture. Before I could gather my thoughts, my phone quietly vibrated. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. I hesitated before answering. An older man's gentle voice greeted me immediately. Miss Bennett, my name is Samuel Green. I was your father's attorney many years ago, and later I worked with Nathan's father as well. My heart skipped. I believe you have something that was meant to reach Nathan eventually, he continued. But if you deliver it carelessly, innocent people may be hurt by those trying to protect their own reputation. We agreed to meet that afternoon inside a quiet botanical garden on the northern side of the city. The place felt almost untouched by time. Autumn leaves covered winding stone paths, fountains reflected pale sunlight, and elderly couples slowly walked beneath towering oak trees. Samuel arrived carrying only a leather briefcase and a walking cane. He looked more like a retired professor than an attorney who had once represented powerful families. After carefully examining the photograph and several letters from the wooden box, he slowly closed his eyes before speaking. Nathan's father never wanted revenge, he said quietly. He wanted the truth preserved until his son possessed enough wisdom to choose justice instead of anger. Samuel explained that many years earlier, Several influential businessmen had secretly built charitable organizations that genuinely helped struggling families. Over time, however, one trusted partner began quietly redirecting resources for personal influence while hiding every decision behind carefully maintained public generosity. Nathan's father discovered the deception but refused to expose it immediately because doing so would have destroyed programs supporting thousands of innocent families. Instead, he spent years gathering evidence while searching for the right moment to reveal everything responsibly. Before he could finish, illness claimed his life. He left the remaining documents hidden inside the wooden box, believing one day someone with compassion rather than ambition would complete what he could not. Samuel looked directly into my eyes. "That person was never Nathan," he whispered. "It was always you." The realization left me speechless. Nathan had spent years believing his father died carrying unanswered regrets, never knowing those final decisions had been entrusted to someone completely outside his own family. As we prepared to leave the garden, Samuel handed me a sealed envelope addressed in Nathan's father's handwriting. "Only Nathan should open this one," he said. "No one else." I carefully placed it beside the other documents, inside the wooden box. As I looked toward the garden entrance, I noticed a black luxury sedan parked quietly across the street. Richard Holloway stepped out, exchanged a few calm words with another man, and glanced directly toward the bench where Samuel and I had been sitting. He never waved. He never smiled. Yet something in his expression told me one impossible truth. He already knew I had come back, and he was waiting to see whether I would lead him straight to Nathan. For the next 2 days I avoided every place where Nathan might appear. It was not because I feared seeing him. It was because I feared what would happen if Richard Holloway discovered I had found him first. Samuel's warning echoed through every quiet moment. The truth inside the wooden box had survived for decades because the wrong people never knew where it had gone. If I acted carelessly now, everything Nathan's father had sacrificed to protect could disappear forever. I spent the mornings reading every page inside the leather journal. Nathan's father had written almost every evening, not about money or influence, but about responsibility. One entry remained fixed in my mind. Power should never become louder than conscience. The day that happens, every victory becomes a defeat. The handwriting grew weaker during the final pages, yet the hope inside his words never faded. He believed Nathan would one day become a better man than he had ever been, provided someone taught him that mercy required greater courage than revenge. By the third afternoon I realized I could no longer postpone the meeting that fate seemed determined to arrange. Nathan deserved to know the truth, even if hearing it changed everything he believed about his own past. Samuel quietly arranged the meeting at the old lake house Nathan had given me 3 years earlier. Hidden among tall pine trees beside calm water, it remained exactly as I remembered. The front porch had been freshly repaired. Flower boxes overflowed with late autumn blossoms. Someone had carefully maintained the property all these years even though no one lived there. I unlocked the front door using the same silver key Nathan had placed in my hand at the train station. Inside, nothing had been disturbed. Books rested neatly on wooden shelves. A firewood basket stood beside the stone fireplace. Fresh coffee beans filled a glass jar on the kitchen counter, as though someone expected company every single day. I gently placed the wooden box on the dining table and waited. As sunset painted golden reflections across the lake, a familiar black sedan slowly entered the gravel driveway. Nathan stepped out alone. 3 years had added quiet maturity rather than age. His charcoal coat moved gently in the cool breeze while his calm blue eyes searched the porch until they found me standing beneath the hanging lantern. For several long seconds neither of us spoke. Every unanswered letter, every silent birthday, every memory of the train station seemed to exist between us. Nathan climbed the porch steps with the same measured confidence I remembered. "You came back," he said softly. I smiled through gathering tears. "I told myself I never would." His eyes rested briefly on the wooden box sitting inside the doorway. Something changed across his expression. Not fear. Recognition. "You found it," he whispered almost to himself. I nodded. Your father left something unfinished. Nathan looked toward the quiet lake before answering. I always believed he did. We entered the house together, closing the door against the cool evening air. I carefully placed the leather journal, the photographs, and the sealed envelope across the dining table. Nathan reached toward the final unopened letter addressed in his father's handwriting but stopped only inches away. His hand trembled almost imperceptibly. I buried him believing he had already told me everything that mattered, he admitted quietly. I looked at him with gentle certainty. I think he spent his last years making sure he had not. Nathan slowly broke the aged seal and unfolded the letter with extraordinary care. As his eyes moved across the first few lines, every trace of calm disappeared from his face. Before he could finish reading, headlights suddenly illuminated the windows from outside. Another vehicle had entered the driveway, and only one man besides Samuel knew exactly where we were. The sound of tires crunching across the gravel driveway echoed through the quiet lake house like a memory refusing to stay buried. Nathan carefully folded his father's unfinished letter before placing it beside the leather journal. Neither of us hurried toward the window. Somehow we both already understood who had arrived. A single black luxury sedan stopped outside the front porch. After a long moment, Richard Holloway stepped out alone, dressed in an immaculate navy overcoat despite the cool evening wind. He carried no briefcase, no umbrella, and no visible sign of urgency. His calm confidence unsettled me more than raised voices ever could. Nathan quietly rested one hand against the dining table before looking toward me. Stay here, he said softly. I gently shook my head. I did not come back to hide behind you. For the first time since I had returned to the city, a faint smile crossed his face. It carried pride more than relief. Together we opened the front door. Richard climbed the wooden porch steps at an unhurried pace, stopping several feet away with respectful distance. Nathan, he greeted warmly. Claire. I had hoped we could speak before unnecessary misunderstandings grew larger. His voice remained smooth and reassuring, exactly the kind that inspired immediate trust. Years earlier I probably would have believed every word. Nathan remained composed. You already knew Claire had returned. Richard gave a slight nod. The city notices more than people realize. He glanced briefly toward the wooden box resting inside the house. I assume you have discovered your father's old collection. Nathan did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked a single question. Did my father trust you? Richard lowered his eyes for a brief moment before responding. He trusted me for many years. The honesty inside that answer caught even me by surprise. Richard slowly continued. Your father believed protecting charitable programs mattered more than exposing every mistake immediately. We disagreed about timing, not purpose. I quietly stepped forward. Then why were the documents hidden instead of delivered? Richard looked directly at me. Because once they became public, every family depending on those foundations would suffer while newspapers searched for scandal instead of solutions. His explanation sounded reasonable, yet something still felt incomplete. Nathan reached for the leather journal and opened one marked page. He silently handed it toward Richard. I watched Richard read his own name written in Nathan's father's careful handwriting beside a single sentence. Good intentions become dangerous when they begin protecting reputations instead of people. Richard remained perfectly still. The confidence that had carried him onto the porch slowly faded into quiet regret. He closed the journal and returned it without argument. Your father wrote those words after our final meeting, he admitted softly. He was right. None of us spoke for several moments while gentle waves moved across the lake behind the house. Finally, Richard removed a sealed folder from inside his coat. Everything remaining is here, he said. Financial records, correspondence, and every document I should have delivered years ago. I kept telling myself I was protecting stability. Eventually, I realized I had only been protecting my own fear. Nathan accepted the folder without accusation. He never raised his voice. He never demanded explanations beyond what had already been offered. Watching him reminded me of the lesson his father had written inside the journal. Mercy often required greater courage than victory. As Richard quietly prepared to leave, he paused at the edge of the porch. "There is one more truth," he said without turning around. "Your father did not choose Claire because she could uncover the evidence. He chose her because he believed only she could convince you to use the truth wisely." Nathan looked toward me with eyes carrying both gratitude and quiet disbelief. Before either of us could answer, Richard added one final sentence. "Tomorrow morning the entire city will learn what really happened. After that, Nathan, every decision will belong to you alone." Morning arrived wrapped in extraordinary silence. The lake reflected a pale blue sky while thin layers of mist drifted across the calm water outside the cabin windows. Nathan had barely slept. Neither had I. The leather journal, the letters, and Richard Holloway's final folder remained spread neatly across the dining table exactly where we had left them the night before. Sunlight slowly illuminated every page as though the morning itself had come to witness the truth. Nathan stood quietly beside the window holding the final letter his father had written. He read it again without speaking. When he finally folded the paper, there was no anger in his expression. Only peace mixed with sadness. "He spent his final years trying to protect everyone," Nathan said softly. "Even the people who disappointed him." I looked at the old journal resting between us. "Maybe that is why he trusted you to finish what he started." Nathan slowly shook his head before offering a faint smile. "No. He trusted you to remind me how." Shortly after sunrise, Samuel Green arrived carrying several additional legal folders prepared overnight. Together the three of us reviewed every document carefully. Financial records were organized chronologically. Letters explained every major decision. Independent audits confirmed the charitable foundations had genuinely transformed thousands of lives despite the mistakes hidden behind their leadership. Nathan remained focused on one principle throughout every discussion. "No innocent family loses support because of today's decisions," he repeated quietly. Samuel nodded with visible respect. "That is exactly what your father hoped you would say." By late morning, Nathan contacted the attorneys responsible for managing his family's remaining business interests. Rather than issuing dramatic orders, he calmly instructed them to cooperate fully with independent investigators, transfer every charitable program into transparent public oversight, and publish every historical record exactly as his father had intended. Several advisors questioned whether such openness might damage the Walker family's reputation. Nathan answered with remarkable calm. "If honesty damages our reputation, then we were protecting the wrong reputation." Watching him speak, I finally understood why his father believed Nathan would one day become the man he had always hoped for. True leadership did not become louder during difficult moments. It became quieter. That afternoon we drove together into the city for the first time since my return. News organizations had already begun reporting the release of decades-old documents explaining the charitable foundation's complete history. Headlines spoke of transparency, accountability, and unexpected integrity rather than scandal. Public officials praised the decision to reveal every record voluntarily. Community leaders expressed gratitude that funding for hospitals, schools, and neighborhood programs would continue uninterrupted under new independent management. Nathan had preserved both the truth and the people his father wanted protected. As evening approached, we stopped outside the old train station where everything had changed 3 years earlier. The same platform stretched before us beneath soft, golden sunlight. Commuters hurried toward departing trains, unaware of how deeply that place had shaped our lives. Nathan looked toward the empty track where he had once watched my train disappear into the distance. "I believed letting you go was the only way to keep you safe," he admitted quietly. I stepped beside him until our shoulders almost touched. "It was the right decision then," I answered honestly. "If I had stayed, none of this would have been found." He nodded slowly without regret. For several peaceful moments we simply watched another train arrive. It reminded me how life never truly stopped moving, even when hearts believed they had. Just as we prepared to leave, Nathan's phone vibrated softly. He glanced at the message before looking toward me with quiet surprise. Samuel had discovered one final sealed document hidden inside a safety deposit box registered in Nathan's father's name. According to the bank records, it had remained unopened for nearly 25 years, and the only two people authorized to unlock it together were Nathan Walker and Claire Bennett. The following morning felt strangely different from every day that had come before it. For the first time in years, Nathan was no longer carrying the weight of unanswered questions about his father. The truth had finally stepped into the light, and instead of destroying his family, it had restored the honor that had quietly waited beneath decades of misunderstanding. We drove together to the historic downtown bank just after sunrise. The building stood exactly as it had for generations, its marble columns glowing beneath soft morning light, while golden leaves drifted across the stone steps. Samuel Green waited near the entrance, holding a leather portfolio and offering the same gentle smile that had guided us through every difficult discovery. "Your father chose this place because he believed some promises deserved patience," Samuel said quietly as we entered. A bank representative escorted us into a private vault beneath the building. Thick steel doors slowly opened, revealing rows of carefully numbered safety deposit boxes stretching into the distance. Everything felt peaceful rather than dramatic. The representative stopped before one particular box, checked the authorization documents, and stepped away to give us privacy. Nathan looked at me before inserting his key. I placed mine beside his, and together we turned both locks at the same moment. Inside rested only 3 items: a faded photograph, a folded handwritten letter, and a small velvet box. Nathan picked up the photograph first. It showed his father standing beside my parents nearly 30 years earlier, all 4 of them smiling outside a newly opened community learning center. I stared at the image in disbelief. "Our families knew each other," I whispered. Samuel nodded gently. "Long before either of you were born into the lives you eventually lived." Nathan slowly unfolded the final letter. His father's handwriting remained steady despite the passing years. The letter explained that both families had once worked together to build educational programs and neighborhood charities before life gradually separated them onto different paths. My parents had continued serving local schools while Nathan's father accepted greater business responsibilities. Even after losing contact, both families quietly continued protecting the same community in different ways. Near the end of the letter, Nathan's father wrote words that left both of us speechless. "If this letter is ever opened, then destiny has already done what I never could. It has reunited 2 people who understand that influence means nothing unless it creates hope for someone else." Nathan carefully lowered the letter before opening the small velvet box. Inside rested 2 simple silver pins shaped like tiny oak leaves. Samuel smiled warmly. "Those were created for the founders of the Community Learning Center. Your father believed one should belong to you, Nathan. The other was always meant for Claire if life ever brought you together again." I gently held the small silver pin between my fingers. It carried no diamonds, no extraordinary value, only quiet meaning. Somehow it felt more precious than anything money could purchase. As we left the vault, Nathan remained unusually thoughtful. Instead of returning to the city immediately, he asked me to drive with him to the old community learning center shown in the photograph. The building still stood at the edge of a peaceful neighborhood, although time had faded its paint and weathered its wooden sign. Children laughed on the nearby playground while teachers welcomed families through the front entrance. Nathan quietly watched the scene for several moments before speaking. "My father never wanted me to inherit power," he said softly. "He wanted me to inherit purpose." I looked at the silver oak leaf resting in my hand and smiled. "Then maybe this story was never about secrets at all." Nathan nodded gently. "Maybe it was always about what we choose to build after the truth finally sets us free." Just then the school principal stepped outside carrying an old guest register she had recently discovered during renovations. She looked directly at us with quiet surprise. "There is something written inside that both of you should probably see." The school principal carefully carried the old guest register into the quiet library overlooking the playground. Dust floated gently through the afternoon sunlight, while the laughter of children drifted through the open windows. Nathan and I sat beside one another at a worn oak table that had probably witnessed thousands of students chasing dreams over the years. The principal placed the heavy book before us with remarkable care. "We discovered this during the renovation," she explained. "It had fallen behind a cabinet decades ago. The leather cover showed its age, but the pages remained beautifully preserved." As Nathan slowly turned through the entries, familiar names appeared one after another. Teachers, volunteers, donors, and neighborhood families had all signed the register during the community center's earliest years. Then he suddenly stopped. Across 2 facing pages were the signatures of both our parents, written on the same afternoon nearly 20 years earlier. Beneath their names, Nathan's father had written a short message in careful handwriting. "May the children who grow from today's kindness someday protect one another when we no longer can." Either of us spoke for several moments. The sentence felt less like a coincidence, and more like a promise quietly fulfilled by time itself. The principal smiled softly before leaving us alone with the book. Nathan gently traced the faded handwriting with one finger. "He never believed destiny was magic," he said quietly. "He believed it was built one good decision at a time." I looked through the nearby window where children chased one another beneath tall maple trees. "Maybe that is why he trusted ordinary people more than powerful ones." Nathan smiled. "That sounds exactly like something he would have said." Before leaving the school, the principal invited us into one final room that had once served as the founders' meeting hall. Framed photographs lined every wall, documenting decades of neighborhood history. In the center stood a simple wooden plaque listing every original contributor to the Community Learning Center. My parents' names appeared beside Nathan's father's name exactly as they had existed long before our lives separated. At the bottom of the plaque another sentence had been carved into the wood. "Communities survive because ordinary people choose extraordinary kindness." Nathan quietly removed the silver oak leaf pin from his pocket and placed it gently against the plaque for a brief moment before fastening it back onto his coat. I attached my own pin to my jacket with a grateful smile. Neither of us needed to say what we were both thinking. We already understood. As evening settled across the neighborhood, we walked together through streets that had once been shaped by our parents' shared dreams. Small family businesses prepared to close for the day. Elderly neighbors greeted one another from front porches. Children carried library books home beneath glowing streetlights. Every ordinary moment suddenly felt connected to the stories we had uncovered. When we reached the quiet lakeside road, Nathan stopped beside the water where autumn leaves floated peacefully across the surface. 3 years ago I believed letting you go was the final gift I could give you," he admitted softly. I looked toward the fading sunset before answering. 3 years ago I believed coming back would only reopen old wounds." He turned toward me with the calm expression that had first made me trust him. "Were we both wrong?" I smiled gently. "No. We were simply early." Nathan laughed quietly, the sound lighter than I had ever heard before. For the first time since we met, either of us carried the weight of unfinished questions. We only carried tomorrow. Just as we prepared to leave the lakeshore, Samuel called once more. His voice sounded unusually emotional. "Nathan," he said gently, "the city council has finished reviewing your father's final request. They want both of you present tomorrow morning because they have unanimously decided to fulfill the last wish he left behind before he passed away." The city council chamber was already filled when Nathan and I arrived the following morning. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating polished wooden floors and rows of local residents, teachers, volunteers, and community leaders who had quietly gathered for an occasion none of us had fully expected. There were no reporters crowding the entrance, and no dramatic speeches waiting to unfold. Instead, the room carried the peaceful atmosphere of people preparing to honor a promise that had survived an entire generation. Samuel Green stood near the front beside the mayor, holding the final folder that had accompanied Nathan's father's last request. After everyone had taken their seats, the mayor welcomed the community with a warm smile before explaining that the city had completed its review of every historical document, every charitable record, and every written wish left behind by Nathan's father. He paused before reading the final paragraph aloud. If the truth ever reaches the light, let it become the foundation for something greater than my mistakes. Let every child who enters these doors inherit opportunity instead of my regrets. Silence filled the chamber. Nathan lowered his eyes, taking a slow breath before looking toward the family seated throughout the room. I could see pride replacing the burden he had carried for so many years. The mayor then invited Nathan and me to join him on the small stage. Together we unveiled a simple bronze plaque announcing the official reopening of the Walker and Bennett Community Learning Foundation, created in honor of every family that had quietly protected the neighborhood through kindness rather than recognition. The audience rose together in gentle applause, not for us, but for the legacy that had finally found its rightful home. Later that afternoon we returned to the restored learning center where children already filled the classrooms with laughter. Fresh books lined newly painted shelves. Volunteers welcomed families through the front entrance. Teachers prepared art supplies while parents gathered around long wooden tables discussing future programs. Everything felt alive. Nathan walked slowly through each room, greeting every staff member with sincere gratitude instead of authority. No one saw a feared businessman. They simply saw a man honoring his father's final lesson. Outside beneath the large oak tree planted by the original founders decades earlier, Nathan quietly turned toward me. 3 years ago I believed losing you was the price of protecting you, he said. Now I understand something different. Love does not always ask us to hold on. Sometimes it asks us to become the kind of person worth returning to. I smiled, remembering the train station, the lake house, the wooden box, and every quiet decision that had carried us to this moment. And sometimes, I answered softly, coming back is not about the past. It is about finally recognizing where your future has been waiting all along. Nathan reached into his coat pocket and removed the small silver oak leaf pin his father had left for him. Beside it, my matching pin reflected the warm afternoon sunlight. Together we fastened them onto the welcome board inside the entrance where every child entering the building would see them, not as symbols of power, but as reminders that kindness could outlive fear, and truth could outlast silence. As the sun slowly settled beyond the trees, children raced across the playground while neighbors filled the courtyard with conversation and laughter. The city moved forward exactly as it always had, yet everything felt different because two families had finally completed a promise begun long before either of us understood its meaning. I once believed our story ended on a quiet train platform when Nathan let me walk away. I was wrong. That morning had never been the ending. It had simply been the first chapter of a journey that taught us the strongest people are not remembered for the power they held, but for the hope they left behind, because the greatest secret we uncovered was never hidden inside a wooden box at all. It had always been waiting inside two ordinary hearts willing to choose forgiveness over fear, purpose over pride, and love that never needed to imprison anyone in order to last forever.